Welcome back to Not Another Nux podcast with your hosts Ajay and Harp, brought to you by Loudmouth Brewing. For the best beers and burgers in town, go to Loudmouth Brewing in Abbotsford. Ajay, so much has happened recently with the NHL and the NHLPA finally coming to an agreement. What are your thoughts on all the information that's out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the information is still kind of coming in. It's all kind of new. As a Canucks fan, I think the biggest news story is the fact that BC government has not allowed the NHL to allow games to be happening in our province, which basically means we don't know where the Canucks will be playing. There's rumors out there right now that they might be playing out of Edmonton, which is crazy to think, but I don't know what that means for our season. What do you think about that news?
Honestly, like seeing everyone and the way they are reacting on Twitter, it seems like Bonnie Henry went from hero to like villain in the matter of 2 weeks, not even. Here's the thing, I get the sentiment, but the thing is, it would matter more if people were allowed in the building. I think that the fact that we can't have anyone in the building anyways, I don't see the big deal, to be honest. It does suck, but this is where I'm disagreeing with you. I think that the fact that no one's in the building anyways, and the fact that we can't really host them in kind of the environment that's conducive to a lot of excitement, right? It'll be pretty much what we saw before in the summer. Just because that alone, I can see why the government's like, you know what? There's new strains of the coronavirus happening right now, and we don't want to put anyone at risk. We don't want to, take that level of risk on. Might as well let other provinces do it, let them sort it out themselves. But the thing is this, that's my thought on it. But the thing is, BC is getting called out a lot. BC is not the only place that's saying no. Apparently, Quebec is saying no. San Jose in America, they're also saying no, and there's a few other US teams that are also they're like, no, we don't want games to happen.
Yeah, so I've also heard that Ontario is another province that is not really for playing games in their own province. So yeah, I do agree. I think there's a lot of other cities and states and provinces that are putting a roadblock for the NHL.
But the thing is, people online are just going wild about this, and I don't see you know what, I am very excited. It would be awesome to see the Canucks just playing in Rogers Arena, and just seeing them playing at home is almost like kind of like a step closer to normality, and just having your own home team play at home. I totally get how that can drive fan sentiment up, but the thing is this, when it comes to safety, you gotta look at the bigger picture.
So wait, hold on, so let me just kind of clarify your stance. So are you saying it's not that big of a deal, that people on Twitter are just kind of making it bigger than what it really is?
Yeah The thing is, if people were allowed in the building, this is where I think we're kind of disagreeing a bit. I really think that it's not that big of a deal.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, well,
I don't know, man. I would have to disagree. I think it's a huge deal. So let's just look at just the Canadian division alone.
Okay.
If Vancouver is the only team that has to play their games, let's just say they're playing in Edmonton.
Okay.
So they're sharing a rink with Edmonton. They basically have to take all of their stuff that they took during the bubble, kind of set up a makeshift kind of training room, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be all makeshift. And then another thing is how do the players basically leave their families for 60 games, right? Because their families are now in Vancouver, settled here. Their kids are going to school here and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Granted, most schools kind of done through the internet and stuff, and through Zoom and whatnot. So I guess they could kind of work around that. But if they're in Edmonton, are they staying in hotels? That's a massive mental drain that I think teams that have to do that have to go to another city as a temporary home base, are at a major disadvantage.
You know what? You are right when it comes to that. But the thing is, I never said it was going to be easy. This is definitely going to be very hard for any provinces that say, no, we're not going to allow teams to come in. But the thing is this, honestly, the way I'm looking at it, and the only reason I'm disagreeing is because we got to look at the bigger picture here. I do want hockey back, obviously. But the thing is, COVID is getting kind of out of control again.
Yeah.
And especially in BC. And the thing is, when it comes to some of our health advisors, the way they're looking at it, it's not that, oh, we're stopping fans from having fun. It's literally, we're stopping infections from increasing, because some of these players that are coming here, it's not just the players coming out of town and possibly meeting people and spreading it. The fact is that when you have sports games, especially in a region where closer to home, and all of the fans are going to want to kind of congregate to a location where they can watch the game and be part of kind of the sports environment again. I read that that's kind of one of the things that people are worried about, is just the spread of COVID between the general public as it already is, not only just from the people coming from out of town to play in our arena. And the thing is, if we can limit the infections in BC and have these players play, say they play in Alberta, where infections are crazy, but I know that government system is completely different, right? Their viewpoints are different. If they're doing it there and they increase infection rates there higher, I know that's sad for that particular province, but the way our province is looking at it is that, you know what, this is a risk we're willing to take to save potential lives and the people we're working with. That being said, does it suck? Absolutely. You know, like this is it's gonna suck to see the Canucks call another arena home again.
Yeah, okay, so let me just kind of clarify my point. I agree
Yeah.
with you in the sense that I think people's health is number one priority over hockey.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say that, you know what, like what Bonnie Henry said was wrong or that I'm like in disagreement, but to your points though, so if they're worried about people congregating in areas because hockey's back in the city, wouldn't they still be doing that if hockey's back but in Edmonton? Like if you're saying that people will be congregating in like restaurants and other like or people's houses and stuff, wouldn't that still be happening whether the games are happening in Vancouver or Edmonton? And
Yeah.
then the second point about with people traveling in. So okay, I can see that point where like okay, if like we don't want planes coming in from all these other cities across Canada, but if these players were to fly commercial, they can get a flight the next day. There's flights coming in from Edmonton, there's flights coming in from Toronto. Those are not restricted, but for some reason these private planes coming with players and staff that are all being tested, are all negative for COVID, are basically flying private, then getting onto a bus, going to a hotel room, staying isolated from the public. That's a danger, but free travel between cities is fine. Like that part I don't think makes sense to me. Like how can you say that you're worried about plane travel and stuff, but you can catch a flight right now from Vancouver to Toronto and that's no problem? So if the players were to fly commercial, then that's okay.
Like here's the thing. We're looking at it in only a Canadian perspective, right? And flying between Canada.
Yeah.
Many of these players are coming from European countries and other foreign nations, right? That where the death toll and the cases of COVID are actually much higher and the infection rates are much higher because they actually have different strains of COVID. And so we have like I know in Sweden, because the way Sweden's kind of laid out, it's like villages pretty much, and then you have main cities, right?
Yeah.
The way it's broken up. The thing is, the strains of COVID that are hitting parts of Europe now, especially Sweden and especially in the UK, they are so high. The rate of infection is so high and it's so much stronger that when it comes to like people coming from overseas to Canada, that's the biggest worry. The fact that, you know, maybe our testing is not up to par with this new strain. Maybe our safety levels are not as high as it should be, because if this new level of infection comes and hits our shores, we're, you know, the risk level is way too high. And to be honest, especially when it comes to Vancouver and especially BC, we have a really high elderly population rate. A lot of people come here to retire. A lot of people come here to retire, right? Just because of scenery alone. That's where we're going to see a lot of like the death count and a lot of the infections.
That's a fair point. But if that is one of their concerns, that, you know, like Sweden and these other European countries have these different strains of the virus, then why doesn't the federal government block travel like from here to Sweden? Because I think flights are still going from like here to Sweden, here to like basically anywhere in Europe. You can still fly.
But the thing is, if you look at the timeline, right? Like if you look at people coming in from, you know, like I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not trying to argue with you. But the thing is, if people are coming from out of town, well, the immediate step is that they're supposed to quarantine and everything and follow the general guidelines, right? But the thing is, with the NHL, literally starting from January 3rd, you have camp opening up, right? And then within camp, you are in an environment that is very, very conducive to infection rate. Like sports arenas and gyms and workout equipment and locker rooms, right? Like sicknesses spread so fast. I'm not sure when I've ever been part of a sports team, and whenever one person gets sick and we're in the locker room, or you know, like it just spreads so fast. Everyone on the team gets sick, right? You're sharing water bottles, you're sharing like workout equipment, you're sharing so much stuff, and you're just in an area where you're breathing so heavily that there's so much moisture in the air. The other thing is this, man, like the speed of rate that this season is gonna happen. There's only I think what 56 games or 46 games, something like that.
56.
So, January 3rd, you got camp starting. January 13th is the first game. There's no preseason, and from there you have people flying from all over different places, not knowing what their friends or family, whoever they actually live with at home, have been exposed to, whether it be school or, you know, work or whatever, you know, where someone's wife works or where someone's kids goes to school. And then you're flying the next day to another place, and then there's no quarantine period, right? You're just getting tested every day like crazy. And then some tests, though, when you get infected with a virus, it doesn't show up right away, right? Your body has to build antibodies up. It takes a few days or a couple of weeks at least for the antibody test to pick it up. So that's where I'm just like, you know, that
it's
can
just
be
too big of a risk to like. So I guess what you're just basically trying to say is that it's just too big of a risk to the citizens in the province. And like that makes sense to me. I guess for me it was just like a bit of mixed messaging and just knowing that the Canucks are going to be at a major disadvantage if they're the only city. But I have heard that a bubble is still on the table for the Canadian teams. Because like kind of like what you said, like Ontario. So I think Toronto, like the Maple Leafs, the Senators, and the Canadians are also teams that are still kind of having some fight back from the government. I think BC's been the strongest, which is why they've been getting so many headlines. But those teams are also kind of getting some headlines. So I think a bubble in Edmonton might the result. And if that's the case, then I'm fine with that because basically all the teams are at the same. I mean, I guess aside from Edmonton, who would still be able to go home, but all the teams would be basically at the same disadvantage level. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what they end up doing because, like you said, there's only 24 days left or something like that. It's like ridiculous how quick it's going to start.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But so yeah, go ahead.
And the thing is, like, back to your point, like, say Canucks are the only team that have to live in a bubble. That's annoying, and they're gonna be such a disadvantage, right? Like, you saw how they played in Game 7 against Vegas. They were dead tired. There's nothing left, right? And you can't even go home and just kind of just like see someone to just bring your spirits up, right? Like sometimes just seeing like your family after a long day, that alone can make you like, all right, let's go get it tomorrow, right? Let's work hard tomorrow. But like, they're just stuck. If the only team stuck in a bubble, that's gonna be a piss off. And to be honest, man, like I don't think the season's gonna go too well. No. Just mentally, it's so draining mentally.
Yeah, I agree. But so bubble and kind of where the teams are playing aside, what do you think about the whole thing about one Canadian team? So basically, it's guaranteed that one Canadian team is going to the Final Four.
Yeah.
Which is it's crazy to think that Canucks have a pretty decent shot at going to the Western Final. Basically, is what it would be. What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? I think the Canucks have a really good chance of being one of the top 4 teams. I do agree there. But the thing is this. I think that if they're going to grab a spot, it has to be the number 4 spot. I don't see how they're going to beat out Edmonton, Calgary, or even the Maple Leafs when it comes to the top 3 spot. I think the rest of the teams, the Canucks have a chance of getting, beating them. But that being said, kind of what are your thoughts?
I think it's crazy. So I think what you're saying is like, in order for them to kind of get far in the playoffs, they got to be in the middle of the division. But I guess what I was trying to get at is, so even though they're in the Canadian division, so in the playoffs, what's going to happen is for the first 2 rounds, we're only going to be facing Canadian teams.
Yeah.
The final 4 in the entire league, one of those teams will be a Canadian team.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good point because that's a piss off. Like my favorite part of the playoffs is especially when Canadian teams make it. And I think last year we had quite a few, right? We had a fair bit. And
but the fact that we're guaranteed to have one Canadian team that finishes in the top 4 of the entire league, that's pretty cool. Like that's pretty sick. Like that's really exciting. The fact that Canucks could make it to the Western Conference Final and they won't have to see any other team aside from the Canadian team.
Yeah, the fact that a Canadian team makes it to the final immediately, that's really cool. I think that's pretty awesome, and we haven't seen that in a while. To be honest, when you break it down like that, the Canucks do have a really good chance. Actually, we've seen how good they are in their first season in the playoffs, making the playoffs, and we've seen how bad teams like Toronto are after making the playoffs many times, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's awesome that they're guaranteed a spot. But I am still kind of upset the fact that like my dream is to watch 2 Canadian teams in the finals. Right?
Oh yeah.
Like that would be so amazing. I think a cup coming back to Canada, no matter who it is, I think that would be huge for Canada. I really think it would. Having one guaranteed team is really dope. But the fact that we have to just pretty much like fight each other out just to get one spot, that sucks.
It sucks, but like we haven't been to the final. There hasn't been a Canadian team that has made, I think, the Western or Eastern final since, man, when was the last one? I can't even think. Like, I mean, we almost made it last year if we had beaten Vegas.
I think 2011 was the last time we made it to any type of like the Western Conference final at least. And then
Canucks, but I'm trying to think of the other Canadian teams. I don't think any of the other ones have made it to the Final Four. I could be wrong, but
I think the last one was probably like Calgary when they lost to Tampa Bay.
That was 2004.
Yeah, that was early 2000s.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the last time. I know Edmonton, they made it.
So,
I think that was before that.
I definitely like our chances in the Canadian division.
Yeah.
And just knowing that we won't have to see another American team until the final, like the top 4, is pretty exciting for their chances. Like this could potentially be our year depending on how things unfold and how well the young players kind of step up.
So saying that, do you think the Canucks have a really good chance of making it all the way there?
Do they have a good chance? Yeah. Because this division is so wide open. Like I know a lot of people are putting Montreal at the top of the division just based off of how they finished in the bubble, but during the season they weren't even a playoff team. So granted, they picked up some good players, Toffoli and a couple other players, but we don't really know what to really expect of them. And then Toronto, like they're a good team, but we all know that they just choke like when it really matters. And then Calgary, they did pick up some good players, but how good are they really, right? So this division is wide open.
They stole every player.
So yeah, so like this division's wide open. So I definitely think they have a good chance.
Yeah, no,
Like if we didn't have those bad contracts, I would have loved to see Benning just go all in on this year, just based off of how things are unfolding. Like if we had some cap flexibility, it would have been amazing to see him go after all these crazy players. You know, like there's like rumors of going after like Hoffman, Hamnick, Holla. If he could have pulled that off with a bit more cap like flexibility and really stacked this team, I think we could have made to the cup final.
No, I agree. It's funny though, because like as you bring up those names, like considering last year, we actually had some pretty decent depth last year, even with the injuries that we had. I think this year we actually lost a lot of depth only because of those have those bad contracts on us. But what do you think about the whole like taxi squad situation that the NHLP and the NHL kind of agreed on? Apparently, you're allowed 4 to 6 players from the AHL, but you're not allowed any other call up.
Yeah, I've kind of read a little bit into this, and the article that I was reading was saying how this really favors Toronto. They're kind of at the cap, and they're able to kind of bury some players through this taxi squad. I don't know, like I don't really know if it benefits us as much as it does other teams that are like right up against the cap that have players, you know, they can send to the AHL, like Toronto. So it's interesting, but who do you really see that would fall into the taxi squad that would really have a impact on our team? There's like, I guess, Bailey that we just signed.
I mean, you probably like look at all like Chatfield, you know, Rafferty.
But do you really see them having like a major impact? Yeah, like Rafferty, I think might do something this year, but aside from him, like I just can't think of anyone.
No, I think that they're just gonna be insurance guys to kind of like say someone gets injured, right? And then you just kind of happen to bring someone up, right? Like Lind, probably he had a game last year, I think, right? And then like you said, Bailey, you're probably gonna bring up DiPietro, right? To get some experience alone, and obviously you need a third goalie. You know? But besides that, I don't see how the tax squad really helps the Canucks out too much.
But with like calling up like DiPietro and stuff, I get it that like he can, you know, get some practice time, but I feel like his development would be better served playing in the AHL, right? And kind of playing meaningful games as opposed to just kind of sitting in the bench and just kind of watching from the press box. So I'd be curious to see who they really kind of fill out this taxi squad with, because I'm sure they're more kind of high profile prospects they might just want in the AHL getting meaningful games and continue to develop. I don't know. Like, what do you think about that?
No, you make a good point there. And to be honest, like assuming there is an AHL season this year, then yeah, absolutely. You have a lot of good players that are missing out on some really good developmental time, right? Especially for DiPietro. For goalies, you want to make sure they develop, right? And he's a small goalie too, right? You want to make sure he gets as much development as possible.
Yeah.
That being said, what are your kind of thoughts on like the potential loss of development on certain players? The truth is, though, I don't even know if there is going to be an AHL season. I think the AHL is kind of canceled this year.
Is that what you've heard? I've heard mixed things. I've heard some people say that it's canceled. I've heard some that say that they're pushing it back and trying to figure out, because I think what they first tried to do was kind of have like a Canadian division of teams, but there's not a lot of Canadian AHL teams. I know Toronto has one in Canada and Montreal.
Winnipeg has one too, I think.
Are they in? Oh yeah, the Manitoba Moose. Yeah. So you have 3 teams, and I know that Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver are going to leave their teams in the States. Instead of bringing them up. So yeah, like I don't know if AHL is a league that can still survive without like that gate revenue.
No, I don't see how they can, because their revenue alone even now is so minimal, and their streaming service is terrible. Like I subscribed 1 year, and the pixelation on it and the quality of the games is not good, and it's just, you know, for something that's that expensive, you expect better product. But yeah, the AHL does seem to be suffering a lot. And to be honest, a lot of NHL teams, I think we brought it up last episode, they're not really developing a lot of players in the AHL anymore, and they're leaving their players in Europe to develop, or other leagues or college, right, in the USA, because they find that the development there is actually much better and it's much more strict, and they find the AHL is just becoming like a second tier league that's not even about development as much anymore. That being said, with the Canadian teams, they decided to name that division the North Division. What's your thoughts on that name?
I wonder how long they took to come up with that name.
I wonder if someone from Toronto just like, we're the North, and then there's like, there you go, we have your name.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to make of it. It's I wish that they would kind of have like fun with it and just kind of come up with cool names or just something different, like name it after a player or something like that. Like
that'd be cool.
They just come up with these like very like routine names that it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, and to be honest, like that's something I could totally see the NBA doing, but that's not something I could see the NHL ever doing. And but one thing though that a lot of people have said is that there's a potential for sponsors to put their name on the division. division, right? And then also advertise themselves on the helmets, just so that they can get more revenue for this year for all the money that they lost, right? What are your thoughts of, say, like the biggest sponsor in Canada, I think is Rona, or like TD Bank? What would you feel about the TD Bank division or like the Rona division?
I saw a mock-up of the advertisements on the helmet, and it was a picture of Britannia and it was Roxy on his helmet.
That's hilarious. Oh man.
That was very appropriate. I do think we're going to get advertisements on the helmets. I think it's just a matter of time. Like, these guys need to make money, and kind of what we've touched on in the past, like these guys are kind of like, they're big time penny pinchers. So I definitely see advertisements coming onto helmets. I've heard jerseys are down the pipeline, but they will be coming as well.
Oh man, I hope that doesn't happen.
But in terms of sponsors, like naming the division, like, sure, okay, go ahead, right? Like, it's stupid, but these guys are clearly after the money.
Oh, I agree. And to be honest, like that's something that NHL does so well is penny pinch. You know, they have so many opportunities to develop the game through like just really cool marketing and really could, like, you know, market penetration, but they don't. They just, you know, they make a team in a desert and then they try marketing it by getting a player that no one's ever heard of. So it's just it is crappy, man.
Like just before we switch gears to Canucks news, I just kind of wanted to mention this. I was listening to the Spitting Chicklets podcast when they had Bill Walsh on it, and he was basically just kind of criticizing the NHL's global policy in terms of how they plan on expanding game globally. And he's like, what they do is they just go to like Sweden, China, play 2 games, and then like never return. And he's like, that's not how you grow the game. Like they like see you for 2 days and then you guys just bounce. You have to spend time, develop it in the grassroots, right? And we kind of really set up your roots, similar to what the NBA has done in China. They've spent a lot of money, right, developing the game, spending money on like grassroots programs, but the NHL, like you said, they have no direction in terms of what they're doing, and they just try and follow the dollar, and whatever makes them the quick buck, that's what they'll do, right? So and it's just frustrating.
Their quick ROI that they're always like worried about is very frustrating, because when you look at the long-term aspect of things, you look at where basketball was even 20 years ago to where it is now, right? Look how big it is in China and India now too. Look at the populations in China and India, right? You have billions of people. A bad viewing day in China and India are still millions upon millions upon millions of views. That's a bad viewing day. The fact that like the NBA is able to tap into that, especially for hockey, is such an expensive sport. For such an expensive sport, you want to work harder to kind of penetrate the market and advertise to people and your target demographic that you think could not only afford the product but also would be inspired by the product, and also, like you said, the grassroots, so that it can develop with the culture, and you have these kids from various backgrounds now being part of it rather than just like the upper class or this and that, right? Like, but it is what it is, man. Like,
what's crazy though, so after the Rangers won the Stanley Cup in '94, there was a Sports Illustrated magazine that came out, and the front page said NHL is hot, NBA is not. Like, that's where, and then what did the NHL do? They locked out the players for almost 2 years. Right after that, like when they had so much momentum, they had a lockout and just killed any sort of momentum they had. And anyways,
like, they're not really good at reading kind of you know, the market and what the market actually wants. That is quite a bit of a piss off. That wraps up part 1 of episode 2 of Not Another Nucks podcast with their hosts Ajay and Harp. We'll be back at you guys very soon. Hope everyone's staying safe. Until then, enjoy some music.